Hi there guys, so Chris Eubank Jr. has confirmed that Roy Jones Jr. is coming over to the UK within the next couple of weeks to train him and be in his corner for the Marcus Morrison fight on May 1st. Now I don't know about you guys, but I'm always interested to see Chris Eubank Jr. back in the ring. He is in there against Marcus Morrison, and yes, he has 3 or more losses on his resume. He's not a world beater, he's not a step up in any way for Chris Eubank Jr., considering he's been coming off of wins against James DeGale and Korobov as well. So you would expect a higher ranked opponent, but he has been inactive, so maybe this is just some kind of keep busy fight, and there will be a bigger one down the line. Now he was previously signed to PBC, and has now moved to the Sauerlands, and is fighting on the Matchroom show, the undercard of Chisora versus Parker, and that was a smart move in my opinion, because I believe that he can't necessarily work with Eddie Hearn. There seems to be a lot of problems with that, and he couldn't get the big fights with PBC. I mean, he had one of them, but they didn't get him that big opportunity, and you would expect that from PBC considering they have a lot of middleweights on their platform, but still, those fights didn't happen. Now, he could have gone with Matchroom, but again, the relationship between him and Eddie Hearn didn't work the first time around, so why would it be any different this time? So going and signing with the Sauerlands, he can still fight on Matchroom shows, but is represented by Kawa Sauerland, who has always been a fan of Chris Eubank Jr. anyway, since Chris Eubank Jr. entered the World Boxing Super Series, and I do believe that at one point there were those who considered Chris Eubank Jr. capable of reaching the final. He came unstuck against George Groves though. I do feel like Chris Eubank Jr. does jump levels too much, so he'll fight, say, a Marcus Morrison, then he'll go too high. He does need to bridge that gap before he gets to the big fight, so perhaps a David Lemieux. That would be a great fight for Chris Eubank Jr. I don't want to see him fight Marcus Morrison, then have the fight that he is looking towards. I don't want to see that. I've seen that before with Chris Eubank Jr. It doesn't seem to work. So, at this stage of his career, can he become a different fighter? Can he still improve? Yes, he can improve. He cannot become a different fighter. He is what he is. The only thing he can do is improve the tools he already has and strengthen some of the weaknesses. We will start to see that as he works with Roy Jones Jr. It is positive that he has someone in his corner who is a legend of the sport, because I think that it takes someone like that for Chris Eubank Jr. to listen, and I believe that having a trainer is very important. I mean, he trained himself for a number of years. That doesn't work. I mean, it's amazing he got to the level that he did without a trainer, but at this stage, if he wants to make an impact in the sport, he needs a trainer and an experienced one. But not just that, it takes way more than that with Chris Eubank Jr. He needs someone that he respects and will listen to. Roy Jones Jr. is that person. And while I'm not really invested in Chris Eubank Jr. versus Marcus Morrison, I'm invested to see what his next move is, because he's going to beat him, or he should be beating him. If he doesn't, then, I mean, you have to ask big questions about Chris Eubank Jr. Big opportunity for Marcus Morrison, and no disrespect to him, but Chris Eubank Jr., if he believes he can get to the level, then he should be beating this guy. And based off of his performances against James DeGale, and even the likes of Arthur Abraham, then he should beat him. The question will be, where does he go next, and will he be on another Matchroom show? I believe he will be, and I believe that his next move should be someone around the David Lemieux level, or maybe even build towards that fight. He does need to make sure that he gets there progressively, instead of going from Marcus Morrison then to a Charlo. I mean, I know he's not going to get the Charlo fight off of the Morrison win, but still, he needs to bridge that gap somehow. I'm interested to see what adjustments he has made during his time at training with Roy Jones, and to see what his decisions are after the fight. I am optimistic as long as he takes the right fights, leading up to the big fight that he wants, because that is what he wants, but at some point he has to realise that he is still young in the sport at the moment, he still has time, but he does need to get a move on and get some momentum building up to that big fight before just jumping from a Marcus Morrison level to the top level. It doesn't work like that, and perhaps he overestimates his ability at times, and that is the reason why sometimes he comes unstuck. That was likely the case in there with George Groves, who outboxed him, outmaneuvered him, and used many tricks of the trade just to befuddle and confuse Chris Eubank to keep him constantly on the end of that jab and the right hand as well anytime he came in. So he does need to show that he is able to adjust. He did do his research and his homework in the build up to the James DeGale fight. You can see that in the way the fight played out. And he gave him the respect he deserves. He must do that from now on with every opponent that he faces. Anyway, guys, what are your thoughts on this? Make sure you leave your thoughts in the comments below. Also leave a like and grab that subscribe button. Thanks guys.